There are moments in life when the silence between people is louder than any word, sharper than any argument. I never thought I would experience that silence with my own son. My name is Maria Ramos. I'm 64 years old, and I spent my entire adult life believing that motherhood meant swallowing disappointments and smiling through pain as long as it made my children happy. But sometimes you only realize you've become invisible when the world starts celebrating, and nobody bothers to look your way. It was a Tuesday, not even a particularly special one, just another ordinary afternoon of errands and grocery lists and tepid coffee cooling in a chipped mug by my side. I was folding laundry when my phone pinged with a photo from my cousin Helena. There, on my tiny screen, was a picture of my son, Daniel, standing in a park, his fiancée Laura on his arm, and a gleaming caption, "We said yes. Save the date." My stomach dropped, and for a second I blamed my eyesight. Surely I would have known before everyone else. Surely my own son would have told me before the news started spreading, like wildfire among distant relatives and Laura's friends. I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, a clumsy attempt at a surprise. But as the days trickled by, my mailbox remained empty, my phone silent except for group messages where the wedding was the only topic, and my own name never came up. I could hear the excitement in every call, Helena bubbling over with questions about the guest list, Laura's mother bragging about the venue, and even my younger sister who lived out of state, calling to ask what I would wear. Each conversation felt like a gentle twist of the knife. When I finally spoke to Daniel, it was almost by accident. He called one evening, his voice distracted, the way it gets when he's trying to avoid something. We talked about nothing at all. The weather, his job, how tired he felt. And just as I was about to ask about the wedding, he cut me off. "It's all happening so fast, Mom," he said. "Laura's handling most of it. I don't want you to stress. It's going to be pretty small, you know. Just a few people from her side, a couple of colleagues, some friends from college. Nothing formal. Nothing formal." I let the words hang there, brittle and thin, and tried to mask the hurt in my voice. "Of course, Daniel. I wouldn't want to be in the way." He sounded relieved, and I felt a shame I hadn't known since I was a child, left out of birthday parties because my clothes weren't as nice as the others. The pattern had returned, only this time it was my own son, grown and successful, who decided I belonged on the outside, not the inside. As the days passed, small details began to sting. Laura's mother posted photos of floral arrangements and cake tastings, tagging everyone but me. A distant relative called, assuming I was helping with the preparations. I made excuses. "Oh, I'm sure they're just busy," or "I'm better at staying out of the way," until even I could hear the lie in my voice. But deep down, I knew this was no accident, no oversight. It was a decision. Every mother tells herself, at least once, that her children would never hurt her on purpose. But sometimes, pride and ambition do what strangers never could. They build walls where doors used to be. The more successful Daniel became, the more he seemed to want to forget the years I spent sewing his clothes, skipping meals to pay for his books, celebrating his smallest victories as if they were Nobel Prizes. Now, I was an inconvenience, a reminder of a past he wanted to outgrow. I told myself to accept it with grace. I told myself it didn't matter. But when I lay in bed at night, the echo of my own silence felt heavier than any insult. It's a strange thing to be both proud and ashamed of the same child. I remembered the first time he brought Laura home, nervous and hopeful, her eyes scanning my tiny kitchen as if it were a curiosity. I'd cooked for them, listened to their dreams, told stories of my own youth that made them laugh. I thought I was being included. Maybe I was just background noise all along. The invitation never arrived. I started to rehearse explanations for when people asked why I wasn't at the wedding. Health reasons, I would say. Travel complications. Anything but the truth that my own son The child I had given everything to simply didn't want me there. But somewhere, in the middle of my sadness, something else started to take root. A quiet resolve, brittle but growing. The same stubbornness that got me through decades of hard work and harder disappointments. If Daniel and Laura wanted me to be invisible, they would soon remember that I had always found a way to be seen, even if I had to remind them myself. And so, in that silence, I began to plan, not for revenge, but for dignity, the kind of dignity that comes from knowing who you are, even when others would rather you forget. I wouldn't let their shame become mine. This story wasn't over. It was just beginning. There is a particular cruelty in how people dress up shame as concern, how they learn to cloak their discomfort with the smooth, practiced words of adulthood. It was only a few days after I realized I would not be invited to Daniel's wedding that the second blow came, more insidious than the first. I was washing dishes, hands warm and wet, when my phone buzzed with Daniel's name. For a moment, my heart stuttered with hope. Perhaps this was the invitation at last, some clumsy attempt at making things right. But I should have known better. Daniel's voice when he spoke was gentle but distant, full of hesitations and long pauses. "Mom, Laura and I have been talking," he began, words tumbling out in carefully measured doses. "You know how the wedding is coming up fast and we're really keeping it small. Mostly her friends from the firm, her colleagues, a few people from my work. You know, it's a certain kind of crowd." He laughed awkwardly, the way people do when they're afraid, to be honest. "It's going to be very formal, very sophisticated. Laura's parents are inviting a lot of important people. We didn't want you to feel out of place. We thought it might be best if you skipped the ceremony. Just this once." For a moment I stood silent, dish soap pooling at my feet, staring at the streaked window over the sink. Outside, the world was golden and full of life, but I felt only the gray chill of rejection. Daniel kept talking, rushing to fill the space I refused to fill for him. "It's not about you, Mom, really. It's just, well, you know how these things are. Laura's family has a reputation to maintain, and her mother can be very particular. We just don't want you to be uncomfortable, or for anyone to say something that would hurt you." I listened to his excuses, the polished sophistication of someone who's learned how to exclude without sounding unkind. The words stung, even as he tried to make them sound like a favor. "You don't have to worry about a thing, Mom," he finished, almost pleading. "We'll come by for dinner soon, just the three of us, somewhere you like." It took every ounce of my composure to answer him with grace. "Of course, Daniel. I wouldn't want to make things awkward for anyone. I hope it's a beautiful day." There was a long silence on the other end. I knew he heard the sadness I tried to hide. I could almost picture him, sitting on the edge of the bed, guilt gnawing at him, but not enough to change his mind. The call ended with a few mumbled words, and the hollow promise of another time, another place. After I hung up, I sat for a long while, the room growing dark around me. How many times had I told myself that loving my son meant letting him go? How many small humiliations had I accepted as the price of his happiness? My thoughts swirled with old memories. The nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays. The weekends I worked double shifts, so he could have what his classmates took for granted. The sacrifices I'd made that Daniel seemed to have forgotten now that he'd crossed into a new world. But the thing about being excluded is that, after the first sting, there comes a strange clarity. The world shrinks to the space you've been given, and you start to see its borders for what they are. Man-made, arbitrary, easy to redraw. I realized then that Daniel wasn't just ashamed of me. He was ashamed of where he came from, and that shame was more his burden than mine. Later that evening, I found myself wandering through the house, touching photographs that lined the hallway, pausing over each frame. Daniel's first day of school, his graduation, the day he brought Laura home for the first time. Each picture was a testament to the life we'd built together, a life now edited down to a story he told to fit a better narrative. But what Daniel didn't know was that I still had a story of my own. I thought of the years I spent working, saving, making sure he would never feel the hunger or cold that I had known as a girl. I remembered every time I had swallowed my pride, every time I had kept quiet for his sake, and I felt something inside me begin to shift, almost imperceptibly, a slow kindling, a refusal to let this be the end of my role in his story. If Daniel wanted a perfect, untroubled day, he could have it. But someday, he would remember what it cost. And so would I. The elegant excuse became a quiet promise to myself. I would not let my love be rewritten as shame, and the silence he left me with would be the space in which I found my dignity again. There is a peculiar ache in the accumulation of small slights. You learn to live with them, brushing them off as unintentional, even as they pile up, pebble after pebble, until the weight becomes impossible to ignore. I wish I could say that Daniel's elegant excuse was the only blow, but the truth is that the real wounds were made, not by a single rejection, but by 1,000 tiny moments in which I was gently, efficiently set aside. I saw it first in the way conversations shifted whenever I entered the room. On holidays, I would arrive at Daniel and Laura's apartment, arms laden with casseroles and cakes, only to find that the real planning was already done, the real decisions already made. "Oh, Mom, we didn't think you'd want to be in charge of the seating chart," Laura would say with that perfect practice smile. Or, "We figured you'd be tired, so we handled the decorations." The message was clear. Thank you for coming, but your help is no longer needed. Each word, each smile, was a carefully constructed barrier. The phone calls became less frequent, then shorter, the topics increasingly superficial. Daniel would call out of obligation, not out of joy or need. "Just checking in, Mom. Everything good?" Always polite, always brief, as if he had an invisible clock ticking behind the conversation. Sometimes I wondered if he felt guilty. But guilt, I've learned, is a quiet shadow that never quite spurs a person to action. There were dinners where Laura's friends would come, elegant women and men with expensive shoes and complicated laughter. I would sit at the table smiling, trying to join the conversation, only to find it drifting around me, never touching down. They talked about trips to Europe, obscure restaurants, wines with names I'd never heard, and every now and then someone would glance in my direction, offering me a crumb of small talk before turning back to their world. More than once I caught Laura's eyes flicking across the table, a subtle signal that my stories, about growing up poor, about learning to make do, were a little too loud, a little too real for their taste. But the silence that stung most came not from strangers but from Daniel himself. There were birthdays he forgot, family gatherings I was not asked to join, photographs I saw later online, smiling faces, toasts raised, the happiness of a family in which I was, at best, an afterthought. Each omission was a cold wind, but I learned to carry my own warmth. I remember one night, after a particularly hollow dinner, sitting at home and tracing my finger over an old photograph of Daniel as a boy, his face lit with the reckless joy of childhood. I wondered when exactly that boy had learned to be ashamed of me, to exchange comfort for convenience, to choose polite exclusion over messy inclusion. The answer, I knew, was hidden somewhere in the spaces between the words we spoke, and those we never did. These small humiliations are not unique to me, I think. Every mother at some point faces the heartbreak of being left behind by the life she worked so hard to build. It is a grief so ordinary that it is almost invisible. We are taught to swallow it, to be grateful for what scraps we are given. But I have never been one to go quietly. As these moments mounted, I started to see them for what they were. Not random, but part of a pattern. A story that Daniel and Laura were writing without me, in which my role was to be silent, to be grateful, to fade gracefully into the background. But I was not ready to be written out. Every small slight became, in my heart, a tally mark, a silent record of all the ways I had been asked to disappear. And as my silence grew heavier, I found myself reaching for something firmer than pride, something closer to resolve. If Daniel and Laura wanted a world without me in it, they were about to learn just how present I could be. The first step was simple. I would stop apologizing for existing. The second, as yet unformed, was beginning to glimmer at the edge of my sadness. There are many ways to be seen, and I was ready to find mine again. There's a certain kind of work that goes unseen, a kind of sacrifice so constant it becomes invisible, even to those who benefit from it most. I was reminded of this late one evening, when sleep refused to come, and I found myself sitting in the quiet hush of my kitchen, surrounded by old receipts, faded photographs, and the faint, lingering scent of cinnamon and coffee. There is a melancholy in looking back, not just at what has been lost, but at all that was given without ever being counted. When Daniel was little, I promised him a different life than the one I had known. I grew up in a world where birthdays meant extra chores, and Christmas was only special if the electricity stayed on. But from the moment I first held him, I decided he would not inherit my struggles. Every dream he had, I carried as if it were my own. I took on every extra shift, sewed clothes by hand, learned how to stretch a paycheck so far that sometimes I amazed even myself. Daniel never noticed the nights I went without dinner so he could have new shoes, or the mornings I woke in the dark to prepare a lunch that looked like everyone else's. He just knew that his needs were met, and his world was safe. Laura, I think, never really understood where Daniel's confidence came from. She saw only the polished exterior, his steady career, his easy laugh, his careful way with words. She didn't see the nights I sat with him at the kitchen table, helping with math homework I barely understood, or the mornings I left before sunrise so he wouldn't have to walk to school alone. All those sacrifices became the soil in which his new life could grow. But now, as they prepared to celebrate the biggest day of their lives, it seemed my part in that story had been scrubbed away. Too humble, too unsophisticated, too out of place for the elegant future they wanted to display. The truth is, I never expected a parade. I never dreamed of medals or awards. I simply wanted to stand somewhere in the back of the room, proud and content, watching my son step boldly into the world I had worked so hard to prepare for him. I wanted to hear the words, just once, "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." But as Daniel's wedding approached, I realized that acknowledgement would not come. Not in words, not in gestures. I was to be the invisible thread holding the tapestry together, unspooling quietly in the shadows. That knowledge stung, sharper than I cared to admit. Sometimes I would watch Daniel laughing with his friends, telling stories that started years ago, and never once mentioned my name. I'd see Laura's mother, her posture perfect, her voice crisp and self-assured, receiving compliments for the smallest contribution, while my labor, my endurance, my relentless love remained unseen. There were moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake, if perhaps I should have insisted on being seen, if I should have demanded recognition instead of offering support in silence. Yet in my core, I knew that true love is often unacknowledged, that the foundation of any good life is built on the backs of those who are willing to stand quietly in the rain so others can walk dry. Still, it is hard not to long for the sunlight sometimes. Hard not to wish, just once, for a hand on your shoulder, a smile across a crowded room, a sign that your presence is wanted, not simply endured. The week before the wedding, as I packed away the last of the casseroles for the neighbors, I looked around my house and felt the weight of all I had given. It was a bittersweet inventory. Every faded curtain, every worn chair, every book on the shelf a reminder of what it means to love without limits. I thought of the tuition bills I'd paid, the dance lessons, the braces, the late-night runs to the pharmacy, and I knew that, whatever happened, nothing could erase what I had done. My history was written in Daniel's laughter, in the way he faced the world, in the life I had quietly, fiercely, made possible. I told myself as I wiped away a tear that being unseen was not the same as being unimportant, but deep down, I felt something shifting, a subtle but unyielding resolve. Perhaps I could not change how Daniel and Laura saw me, but I could change how I saw myself, and that, I realized, might be the beginning of something I had never allowed myself to imagine. A story in which I did not apologize for the space I occupied. A story where I finally took my place in the light. If there is one thing that exposes the cracks in belonging, it is a dress code. The world of weddings, I learned, is not merely about love. It is about image, display, and careful curation of who fits and who does not. In the weeks leading up to Daniel's wedding, I tried, in my own way, to bridge the chasm I felt growing between us. I made quiet suggestions. Perhaps I could help with the invitations or organize a small family brunch or lend the lace tablecloths I'd kept for special occasions. Each idea was politely refused. "It's all being handled, Mom. Laura's family has everything under control. Don't worry, you'll see the photos after." Still, I held out hope that I would at least be present, if only as a quiet observer, blending into the background of Daniel's most important day. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. It was Laura, her voice smooth as porcelain, bright and brittle at the same time. "Maria, I just wanted to talk about the wedding," she said. "You know, it's going to be a really upscale event. We're asking everyone to dress in formal attire. Black tie, gowns, you know, the works. The guest list is all professionals. Daniel's colleagues, my father's business partners. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place. Maybe it would be better if you came to the after party, where things will be more relaxed." The message was as clear as crystal. Your presence in the main event is a risk. My mind flashed with images of my hands, rough from years of work. The lines on my face deepened by worry and sacrifice. I remembered the dresses in my closet, plain and practical. None of them fit for a ballroom. "Of course," I said, voice steady. "I wouldn't want to embarrass anyone." Laura thanked me, a relief audible in her tone, and moved on to other details. The color scheme, the florist, the cake designer's reputation. When I hung up, a hollow numbness settled into my chest. It was not just the exclusion, but the anticipation of judgment. The very people who owed me everything, my years, my labor, my unwavering support, were now embarrassed by the way I looked, the way I spoke, the history I carried on my back. I spent the evening in front of my mirror, holding up old dresses, none of them appropriate, all of them bearing memories. The blue one I wore to Daniel's high school graduation, the white with little yellow flowers I bought the day I got my promotion at the factory. None of them would pass the test for Laura's world. The next day, I went shopping. I wandered through boutiques I'd never entered, fingering fabrics and price tags with a sense of disbelief. Saleswomen glanced at me, some with polite indifference, others with thinly veiled condescension. "Are you shopping for a granddaughter's prom?" one asked. I just smiled. I tried on a few gowns, watching myself in the tall golden mirrors, turning this way and that. I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me, her posture tentative, her eyes wary, her shoulders stooped as if bracing for rejection. In the end, I left with nothing. No dress in that city could hide the fact that I was not who they wanted at that table. I walked home, passing the bakery where I once bought cakes for Daniel's birthdays, the park where I used to push him on the swings. The city was full of reminders that I belonged here, somewhere, even if not at his wedding. That night I sat on my porch in the cooling air, watching the lights flicker in the distance. For the first time I let myself feel angry, not just sad, not just resigned, but truly, righteously angry. How dare they make me feel like a burden, an embarrassment, a shadow on their happiness? How dare Daniel let someone else's vision of perfection overwrite the story of how he got here? I was tired of apologizing for the life I had built, tired of shrinking to fit the space I'd been given. There was a power, I realized, in being out of place. The blue dress, the yellow flowers. These were symbols of the real me, the woman who survived and provided, who loved without condition. I was finished hiding her away. If I was to be a guest at my own son's life, then I would arrive as myself, proud and unashamed. Let them whisper. Let them judge. I would wear whatever dress I chose and carry myself with the dignity that no one could take from me. And in that small act of defiance, I felt, for the first time in years, the faint pulse of hope. I wish I could say that I confronted Daniel or Laura, that I stormed into their apartment and demanded respect, but that was never my way. I have learned, through decades of life's steady lessons, that the most powerful outcries are often those made in silence. That night, after Laura's call about the dress code, I sat at my kitchen table long after the dishes were dry and the house was quiet, my hands folded in my lap, my mind heavy with everything left unsaid. The anger had not faded, but settled in my bones like a stubborn ache, a reminder of every time I had let myself be small, so that Daniel could feel big, so that no one would ever see a single crack in the world I built for him. I thought of all the times I had held my tongue. When Daniel was a boy, and teachers dismissed him because of where we lived, I bit back my indignation and worked harder. When Laura's parents visited for the first time and appraised my modest home with careful, polite words, I forced a smile, grateful that Daniel had found someone who cared for him, even if it meant watching him slip, inch by inch, into a world that did not want to remember me. There is a loneliness in motherhood that no one warns you about. It is not the solitude of empty rooms or silent evenings. It is the loneliness of being misunderstood by the very person you love most. As I sat in the dark, the only sound the slow ticking of the clock, I let the tears come. Not a wild, shattering grief, but a gentle, quiet outcry, the kind that leaves salt trails on your cheeks but never raises your voice above a whisper. I grieved not just for the exclusion, but for the loss of the boy who once needed me, who once asked for my help, who once saw me as the center of his world. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the depth of the hurt. I did not try to explain it away, or soften its edge with excuses for Daniel or Laura. I faced it head on, the humiliation of being told I did not belong, the ache of knowing my presence would be tolerated only if I learned to vanish into the background. It was a grief that demanded to be felt, and I did not look away. Yet as the dawn crept in, painting pale light across the kitchen tiles, another feeling began to rise beneath the sadness, a stubborn, restless spark. I was tired of being patient, tired of swallowing my feelings for the sake of keeping peace. I realized that silence could be both prison and weapon. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken, nor would I hide my pain from myself any longer. If dignity was all I had left, then I would cling to it with every ounce of strength I could muster. I made myself a promise as the city woke around me. I would not fight for a place at their table. Instead, I would remember my worth and carry it like armor. I would not shrink. I would not apologize for the shape of my love, the roughness of my hands, the plainness of my dress. I would let my silence speak, but it would no longer be the silence of defeat. It would be the silence of resolve, of waiting for the right moment, the right way, to reclaim my space. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed. Laura's mother posted another photo of the wedding preparations. Daniel texted once, asking if I'd like to get coffee, sometime next week. I replied politely, and then put my phone away. I went about my errands, paid my bills, watered my plants. I was the same woman as before, yet something essential had shifted. The quiet outcry had given way to a steady, almost serene certainty. They could build their elegant wedding, craft their perfect guest list, dictate who was in place and who was not. but they could not erase the history that made it all possible. And somewhere inside, I knew my story was not over. There was still a part to play, a chapter waiting to be written in my own voice, on my own terms, when the moment finally came. The day Daniel and Laura were to be married dawned in a golden hush, the kind of morning that made the whole city look softer, as if wrapped in gauze. For most, it was a day of celebration, white dresses and polished shoes, laughter and music echoing down bright, clean streets. For me, it began in silence. I moved through my small house with slow deliberation, making coffee, feeding the birds, laying out the blue dress I'd chosen the night before, the one with tiny flowers that reminded me of springtimes when Daniel was small and everything still felt possible. I had not been invited. There was no place card with my name, no official role or seat reserved. But I was tired of waiting for permission to participate in the life I had worked so hard to make possible. I told myself that I would not intrude. I would not create a scene. But I could not bear the thought of another evening spent staring at my phone, scrolling through pictures of strangers celebrating a love I had nurtured from its first breath. That morning I busied myself with little tasks, hands trembling just enough to betray my nerves. I checked my hair a dozen times, pinned it up, took it down, then up again. The blue dress fit a little tighter than I remembered, but I wore it anyway, refusing to be ashamed of the body that had carried and cared for my son for decades. I put on my mother's pearl earrings, small, nearly invisible, but heavy with meaning. By noon, the city buzzed with the anticipation of the event. I could almost feel the energy in the air. Cars double-parked in front of the venue, florists carrying arrangements as delicate as spun sugar, guests arriving in clusters, their laughter rising above the hum of traffic. I stood by my window and watched the sky, wrestling with doubt. Was this a mistake? Would my presence only deepen the wound? But as the clock crept toward the hour of the ceremony, I felt a steadiness settle over me, the same quiet strength that had carried me through years of hardship and sacrifice. I slipped my feet into worn, polished shoes, wrapped a thin shawl around my shoulders, and stepped out the door. The walk to the venue felt longer than it should have. With every step, I rehearsed what I might say if anyone asked why I had come. My heart pounded with anxiety, but beneath it all was something firmer. I was not coming to beg for a place. I was coming to witness a moment I had helped create. The venue itself was beautiful, everything Laura had dreamed. Golden lights strung above manicured gardens, the scent of roses drifting on the breeze, servers moving with the precision of dancers. I lingered at the edge of the crowd, blending into the scenery as guests greeted each other with practiced kisses and champagne flutes. I caught glimpses of Daniel, tall and nervous in his new suit, and Laura, radiant and composed, her arm looped through her father's. Neither of them saw me. For a moment, a pang of humiliation threatened to overwhelm me. I was a ghost at the feast, haunting the periphery of my own son's joy, but I would not be invisible. Not this time. I found a quiet corner near the edge of the garden and stood very still, letting the sunlight warm my face. I watched as the ceremony began, as vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto trembling fingers, and applause rang out over the clinking of glasses. No one noticed me, and for once, I was grateful. I was free to see everything, to take in the beauty, the love, the careful construction of a perfect day. I listened to the speeches, the laughter, the swelling music, and felt a strange sense of pride, tinged with sorrow. This was the world I had made possible with my love, my work, my endless giving. They could try to erase me from the story, but the foundation was still mine. As the sun began to set and the party moved indoors, I took one last look at Daniel, my heart aching with 1,000 memories. I turned to go, my steps quiet but certain, knowing that I had witnessed the day, that I had claimed my place, even if only from the shadows. And as I walked home through the deepening dusk, I promised myself that the time for shadows was ending. The secret I held, the truth about who had truly made this celebration possible, was ready to come to light. My silence had served its purpose. Soon my story would be told. Night had fallen by the time I arrived home. My feet sore, but my spirit strangely calm. I thought the wedding was behind me. I told myself I'd had closure simply by witnessing it. But as I sat in my quiet kitchen, listening to the distant pulse of music drifting through the city's summer air, I realized something in me was still unsettled. I kept picturing Daniel's nervous smile, Laura's poised posture, the glitter of lights over a garden I'd never walked through, all of it woven together by a joy I had spent years preparing, but was never allowed to share. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the reflection in my window. My blue dress was still immaculate, my pearls catching little flecks of streetlight, but I looked more like a shadow than a mother who had just watched her only son get married. Sleep was elusive. I wandered the house picking up old photo albums, remembering the birthdays, graduations, all the milestones I had orchestrated with my own hands. Why was I still on the outside looking in? The answer came with a quiet, steady certainty, because I had allowed it. All my life I'd taught myself to accept whatever seat I was given, to be grateful for scraps of affection, to hide my hurt behind careful smiles. But motherhood had not made me weak. It had made me patient, observant, and, when the moment called for it, bold. The next day I woke with a sense of purpose. The reception would be held that evening, an even grander affair with twice as many guests, clients and colleagues, Laura's extended family, all the people who were supposed to matter. There would be speeches, toasts, and I'd heard a moment to thank the supporters who had made everything possible. I was not named on any official list, but I knew something the rest of them did not. For the past year I had been quietly paying for most of the wedding. Bills sent to me discreetly, debt settled with the understanding that my help was to remain invisible. As I dressed for the reception, I chose the same blue dress. This time I added a silk scarf, soft, proud, a subtle rebellion against the notion that I needed permission to look elegant. My hands shook a little as I left the house, but my back was straight. The city felt different, each street alive with the hush of expectation. Arriving at the venue, I slipped past the crowd at the entrance, ignored by the doorman who assumed I was just another late guest. Inside, the reception was even more lavish than the wedding itself. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over the guests. Waiters glided between tables, and the air was heavy with the scent of roses and anticipation. No one noticed me as I entered. I was used to that. I walked slowly, letting myself take in the grandeur. Every flower, every sparkle, a quiet testament to years of my labor, all hidden in plain sight. The speeches began just as I found an empty chair at the back of the hall. Laura's father spoke first, voice booming with pride. Daniel followed, thanking friends and family for their support. Laura herself raised a glass and thanked everyone who believed in us, who made this dream possible. There was a pause, and for a fleeting second, Daniel's eyes swept over the crowd, passing right over me. I could have stayed hidden. It would have been easier, but I felt the old ache, the one that comes from being erased by your own kindness, your own sacrifices. So when the applause faded and the music rose, I stood up and began to walk toward the head table. People noticed me now. A few curious glances, a few stifled whispers. I walked with purpose, weaving through silk gowns and tailored suits, feeling the weight of my history in every step. As I reached the front, Daniel saw me, his face tightening in confusion. Laura's mouth fell open, the perfect facade slipping for just a moment. I smiled softly, pausing at the edge of the spotlight. The room hushed. With a calm, clear voice that surprised even me, I addressed the bride and groom. I just wanted to congratulate you both, and to thank everyone who came tonight. Some of you may not know me, but I have been watching with pride as this day took shape, and I thought you all deserved to know just how much love, and yes, support, went into making it happen. I let the silence linger, watching Daniel and Laura realize the truth behind my words. For the first time all day, I was not invisible. I was the mother who had paid for the celebration, the woman who had shaped every moment that brought them here. The crowd was quiet, and for a moment so was my heart. This was not revenge, it was recognition. And as I stood there, tall in my blue dress and my mother's pearls, I felt seen at last. What came next would be their turn to respond, but I had reclaimed my voice, and the story was no longer theirs alone to tell. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the delicate clink of a glass somewhere near the back. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the servers froze, trays suspended, caught in the electric pause that follows a truth too big to ignore. Daniel stared at me, his mouth half open, and Laura's hand crept instinctively to her necklace, as if it might shield her from the realization spreading through the room. I took a steady breath, feeling the burn of every eye in the place. For once I wasn't embarrassed by the attention. I spoke in a voice as calm as the one I used to soothe Daniel's nightmares, the one that refused to tremble now. I am grateful for all the kind words tonight. I know I wasn't on the official list, but I thought maybe I could say a few myself. Most of you don't know me. My name is Maria. I'm Daniel's mother. There was a ripple through the crowd, some polite nods, some murmurs, a few faces shifting as pieces clicked into place. I saw Laura's mother frown, saw Laura herself shoot a glance of pure panic at her new husband. Daniel managed a brittle smile, but his voice was thin when he tried to answer. "Mom, he began, but I held up a hand, gentle but firm. I just wanted to say how proud I am to see my son here. So happy. When Daniel was a boy, we had little, but we had each other. I worked hard so he could have every opportunity. And when he and Laura came to me about their wedding, they asked if I could help with just a few things. Just a little help with the venue deposit. Just a bit for the catering. Just to bridge a gap or two. I was happy to do it, as any mother would be. I looked around, letting my words sink in, watching the confusion change to recognition on many faces, especially the guests who had always believed the glossy story Daniel and Laura had presented. But over time, those little things grew. The band, the flowers, the extra invitations, even the dress. Laura's, yes. I paid for the details you see tonight because I wanted my son to have a beautiful memory, and because I thought, for a moment, that maybe I'd be included in it. A stunned hush fell over the guests. Daniel's cheeks burned red. Laura's composure cracked, her jaw tight with the strain of holding back tears. Laura's mother sputtered something about miscommunication, but I didn't look her way. My eyes were on my son. I did not come here tonight to embarrass anyone. I came because I realized I have let myself be written out of a story I helped create. It's easy to pretend people like me are background characters, but I have always been here, paying bills, solving problems, loving you all through the hardest and happiest days. I softened, letting the pride and the ache mingle in my words. Daniel, Laura, I wish you every happiness. And I hope you'll remember that love is not something to be hidden. It's not something to be ashamed of. The history that brought you here, my hands, my sacrifices, all my quiet giving, are nothing to erase. They are the foundation for your new life. Daniel stared at the floor, his voice rough. Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant... I shook my head, forgiving him before the words could finish. I know, son. We all want to fit in. Sometimes we forget where we come from to do it. But just for tonight, I wanted everyone to see me, to see the truth, to see you. I reached out and squeezed his hand. He gripped mine like he did when he was a boy, lost, overwhelmed and still, somewhere deep down, needing his mother. There was no applause. There was no outburst. Only the kind of silence that comes when the world finally sees what it's tried so hard to ignore. I stood tall, breathing easier than I had in years. In that hush, something shifted. I was no longer invisible. The room would remember my face, my words, the courage it took to claim my place. And as I stepped back from the spotlight, I felt the weight lift, not just from my shoulders, but from Daniel's as well. The story was out in the open now, and no one could ever take it back. For the first time in a long time, I was proud, not just of my son, but of myself. After the speech, the wedding's glamour seemed to dim, replaced by a hush that lingered even as laughter and music tried to rise again. For a while, I stood on the edge of the reception hall, unsure whether to disappear into the night or wait for someone to notice I was still there. Eventually, Daniel broke away from a tight circle of friends and family. He walked to me, his expression stripped of all the easy confidence he had worn for months, replaced by something raw and uncertain. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he just stood beside me, looking out over the guests, people who had come to celebrate a love story, never realizing another older one was unfolding just out of sight. Finally, his voice, barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have invited you from the beginning. I thought it would be easier this way, for Laura, for everyone. I forgot what really mattered." I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension there, remembering the weight of all the years I had carried him, literally and figuratively. "You're not the only one, Daniel. We all forget sometimes. What matters is what we do next." His eyes filled, not with shame, but with relief. A child's relief at being forgiven and seen all at once. "Thank you for everything," he said, voice thick. "Thank you for not letting me erase you." Laura joined us soon after, her eyes rimmed red, her hand trembling in Daniel's. "I'm sorry too," she said. "I was so worried about appearances, about making everything perfect. I didn't see what we were losing. I saw in her a version of myself, someone who had worked hard, who had wanted everything to be beautiful, but had misunderstood what real beauty was." I nodded, offering forgiveness that was both gentle and firm. "Perfection isn't what lasts," I said softly. "It's love that survives the spotlight, love that stands quietly in the wings and keeps the world turning." The rest of the evening passed in a kind of dream. Some guests approached to thank me or apologize, to share stories of their own mothers and the silent sacrifices made for family. The reception felt warmer somehow, less performance, more humanity. Daniel and Laura insisted I join them for a final dance. This time there was no stage, no spotlight, just 3 people holding on, finding a new place in the family they were still becoming. In the days that followed, I saw change, not just in Daniel and Laura, but in myself. They called more often, not out of guilt, but from a new desire to reconnect. They asked for advice about their first home, about traditions to keep or break, about the stories I hadn't told before. The shame and distance that had once shadowed our relationship began to fade, replaced by mutual respect and something like gratitude. And I, too, changed. I stopped apologizing for the space I occupied. I took up my seat at every table, family or otherwise, without asking permission. I wore my blue dress and my mother's pearls, not just for special occasions, but whenever I needed reminding of my own worth. Looking back, I see that the real gift I gave my son was not the money or the wedding or the years of sacrifice. It was the example of dignity, the refusal to disappear, the insistence that even a quiet life has a story worth telling. I hope one day Daniel will give that same gift to his own children. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is that love sometimes means drawing a line, not to divide, but to declare, "I am here. I matter. My story belongs too." Never let anyone convince you that your role in the story is over, just because they want to skip ahead. So, to anyone watching who has ever been left out, overlooked, or made to feel like an afterthought, remember, you are the foundation of someone's joy, someone's story. Stand tall, take your place, and if you have a story like mine, share it below. Your voice may be the light another heart needs today. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Daniel, for finally seeing your mother, not just in the crowd, but in your life.